told them to do. They let the Hebrew boys actually live. Well, obviously the king got wind of this and confronted the midwives. Why aren't you following my edict? And they kind of explained it away, kind of cleverly. Hey, these Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. These Hebrew women are very vigorous. Must be all the exercise in slavery. It just makes them give birth so fast, we can't get there in time. And apparently the king believed that, and he accepted that as an explanation, didn't punish the midwives, but then he issues a similar command, not to the midwives, but to all of the Egyptian people. Says, hey, if a Hebrew male is born, kill him by throwing him in the river. You're to drown him. Okay? Now, given that there was such a large number of Israelites at the time, I think it would be very difficult to keep track of every Hebrew woman that was about to give birth. So you would really have to depend, think about it. If Egyptians were going to rat on the Hebrews for having male children, the king's really got to depend on the evil vileness of his own people to execute that command. Okay, and apparently, some probably did, some didn't. Okay. So Moses' parents hid him for 3 months. I always thought it was interesting. Why 3 months? Okay. And it says they hid him because he was beautiful. Okay. What was the purpose in hiding a beautiful child? Well, if one of the ladies in our congregation had an exceptionally beautiful child, okay, in their mind, they're all exceptionally beautiful, right? But let's see, if you've got an exceptionally beautiful child, what do the other ladies want? They want to see him, right? You can't keep that a secret for very long, right? If you have an exceptionally beautiful child, everybody wants to see this child. And at that point, the king's edict could be in jeopardy. If the word gets out, hey, so-and-so has just a beautiful child, let's go see him. The word's going to get out there. And Exodus 2:3 actually says that after 3 months, Moses' mother could no longer hide him. She couldn't do it successfully, okay, for whatever reason, probably because everyone wanted to see him. Okay, point is the word about that does get around. And there may also be another aspect from Moses' parents' perspective. Okay, Stephen, when he appeared before the high priest in Acts chapter 7, in his huge, long summary of Jewish history, before the high priest, he actually tells us that Moses was lovely in the sight of God. Okay, a little bit additional detail there. And so that may also have a slight nuance to the author of Hebrews' understanding of what it meant for Moses to be a beautiful child. It could be, based on Stephen's comment, that his parents understood, not just a beautiful child, but that God had a special purpose for him. Okay, and that perhaps the author here is trying to combine two things. That he's saying Moses was physically beautiful, as the text in Exodus says, but there was also a godly purpose that maybe his parents understood for Moses' life. Okay, and that actually would be the source of why they didn't fear the king's edict. Okay, that's an explanation for that. Okay, I think it's ironic that his mother technically did put her son in the river, right? That was the king's edict. Throw the children in the river. Okay, she did. mentioned the part about the basket with the pitch and all that kind of stuff, and it happened to roll right past the Pharaoh's, sister, that kind of stuff. But why did she do that? That was an act of faith. Okay, what did she believe? I think she believed that God would take care of Moses if she put him on the water. And in that sense, they were not fearful of the king's command. And I think again, it's possible that they understood that God had a purpose for Moses, okay? And in putting him in that basket on the water, they put their trust in God that he would care and preserve Moses' life. And we all, know all the rest of the story there. And if you don't, go watch the Ten Commandments. They do a good job of building that up. Okay. All right. 11:23. Then we have a section of a couple of verses, 24 through 26, that I think is the most interesting chunk of this whole section this week, because there's some things here, actually all of it, almost, that are not mentioned in the Exodus text at all. So, there's some interpretive things that we got to do here. So, by faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to endure ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, considering the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. Okay, so the question is this another example of a New Testament author under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit providing actual historical detail that's not in the Exodus text in the Old Testament? Okay, it could be, or it may be that the author of Hebrews is just reflecting on what he knows of Moses' life and what's been written down in Jewish history and rabbinic tradition, that kind of stuff. Okay? Difficult to say what it is, but there's some pretty interesting phrases here in this text here. Okay? The first one is an idiom. The phrase is translated in the NASB, when he had grown up. When he had grown up. It literally means when he became large. Okay, and that became an idiom for when he grew up. But there's a couple of minor English translations that suggest that phrase could also mean when he became great, perhaps referring to his status as an Egyptian, royal family member here. When he had become a great Egyptian man as a prince and in the court. Okay, that kind of stuff. That could be, but most English translators are just sticking when he grew up. When he grew up. Okay. I made a comment. Some nitpicky comments are in order here. Stephen actually provides that additional detail that Moses made that decision to kind of renounce his royal prince status when he was about 40 years old. Okay, Stephen, in his reiteration of Jewish history in Acts 7, in verse 23, says Moses was about 70 years old when he decided to associate himself with his people. Okay, so that, it's pretty clear Moses understood that he was, of Hebrew ancestry, but he was also a prince of Egypt because the Pharaoh's sister had raised him in Pharaoh's court. That's one of the bigger differences in the Ten Commandments movie. Okay, in the Ten Commandments, Moses doesn't find out he's Hebrew, until, much later in life. Okay, but just one of those things that you compare with the text. Okay, he was about 40 years old when he made this decision. Okay, second question: what was it that Moses gave up? From the text itself, what was it that he actually gave up? He gave up royalty, status, and position. How about what does exactly the text say? I think they're all related, right? The passing pleasures of sin. That's what he gave up. Yeah. And when we got to figure out, okay, what does that mean, the passing enjoyment of sin? You guys have already started, hitting on that. But the question is, what does the author of Hebrews mean by that phrase, the passing pleasures of sin? Okay, and most English versions use that word, pleasures, and that term pleasure usually has some kind of sensual type connotation. Okay, I think it's definitely a larger idea that the author of Hebrews is trying to suggest here. But having a good time, the good time that sin could bring, is kind of the paraphrase that some people would come up with. Yes, Alden. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Sure. Yeah. The passing. The passing. Yep. In this context, that whole context is really, sensuality or sexuality is not really even in the context here. I think what, Mark and Jim have said here is that there's advantages to that prince position. Okay, certainly. Lots of different advantages, and benefits is another good word. So I think the whole term, the passing enjoyment of sin, is kind of points to all the different benefits and advantages that he enjoyed being an Egyptian prince. Okay, there were certainly lots of things that he enjoyed, and when he gave that up to endure, the suffering of his own, people, that's a choice that he made. So that is what Moses gave up. It's all of those benefits, and you could name a bunch of them, and we have started there. But what did he gain? What did he gain? Ironically, the text tells us that he gained suffering with his own people. Usually we don't consider that a gain, right? Or something that we go. But this is this word translated ill treatment. Okay, that's one of these hapax legomena. This is the only time, not only in the New Testament, but only time in the entire Bible that this word is used. Ill treatment, suffering, that kind of stuff. Okay, only occurs here. And some commentators have actually suggested that the author of Hebrews may have invented this word because it doesn't appear in the extra biblical literature. Okay? Now, Paul may have also invented some strictly New Testament words, right? Pastor Joshua, whether he realizes it or not, and I bet he does, he's going to hit one today in Colossians 2:13. Okay, you were made alive together with. Wow, that's a verb that, is not attested to in extra biblical literature. Paul may have invented that word, and both of these words, they're very, Christian gospel-oriented words. So it's not surprising they wouldn't appear in extra biblical literature, of the time. Okay, but Paul couldn't have written Hebrew. So anyway, I like Frauenbaum's summary of this little section, and I've quoted it here. And he's got another one later that I didn't post, but he says this in verses 24 through 28. The writer deals with the faith of Moses and points out two things. Okay, this quote deals with the first one. In verses 24 through 26, his faith is personal. Emphasis is mine there with the bold face in the notes. By faith, Moses refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. The time when he made this decision was when he was grown up. At a certain age, the age of 40, from Stephen, when he was grown, Moses made a decision. Moses' decision was that he would no longer be identified with the Egyptians, but would now be identified with his own, the Jewish people. And this decision was prompted by faith. The position he gave up was to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, the prince. He gave up the position of being the son of a royal princess. Therefore, he gave up his position as a royal prince because faith will sometimes have to reject worldly honor. That was the main point that I thought was it. Faith will sometimes have to reject worldly honor. We bypass, under some circumstances, a desire for worldly honor because this is, not where the Lord would want us to be. Okay? So in verse 26, if we move on in the text here, it presents the reason why Moses' faith compelled him to renounce this position. And it starts with the word he considered. Okay? And that word, that Greek verb there, to consider, is more than just kind of a flippant think or, what we use consider. It really means the whole process of decision making, the wrestling with the facts and the circumstances and weighing the pros and cons. This is a deliberative, careful, consideration of the pros and cons of the decision. Okay, Moses wrestled through this. Definition is from Freeberg. I often use the Analytical Greek Lexicon. It's built into BibleWorks, so it's very easy to pull out definitions of some of these terms. So, in the end, what was Moses' decision? It was to walk away from his position as the prince of Egypt and rather identify with the Israelites, his own people. Okay? And in doing that, the author of Hebrews says the following, is that Moses, in fact, chose to take on the reproach of Christ, which brings an interesting interpretive aspect, to it. And what does that phrase actually mean? Okay, did Moses in any way, contemplate, well, I know that someday the Lord Jesus is going to die on the cross, that kind of stuff. No, I don't think he, had knowledge of that. But some lots of different opinions in the commentary would say that reproach of Christ, that whole phrase, should really be understood kind of in a generic sense. Now, why do they say, should be, understood in a generic sense, because the actual word Christos that's used in the text, that's translated reproach of Christ, literally means anointed. And in the context here of what the author of Hebrews is talking about, who are the anointed? Well, he's talking about the people of Israel, right? Moses decided to associate himself with his people. Okay, there's a sense that the author may mean here in terms of the reproach of Christ is that he undertook the suffering and the reproach of his own people. Okay, that's certainly one way to understand the passage. Problem with that is Christos is not used in Hebrews in that way any other place to mean something like the people of Israel here. Okay, others would see this as a little more typological, that there are similarities between the reproach that Moses was going to undertake and the reproach of Christ. So in what sense would they be the same? Well, Christ endured some suffering, in his crucifixion and death, and Moses was going to take on, a type of suffering too if he had to associate himself with his people. Why? Because they were slaves, right? They were slaves, and that certainly would involve some, because he now associates with the Hebrew nation, he was going to suffer reproach undeservedly, right? Just because of his race. In the same way that Jesus, suffered reproach undeservedly. He committed no sin, but was killed for it. Okay? All right. Continuing on to the text, what was the next thing that Moses gave up? It says the treasure of Egypt was something that he parted with. Now, again, it's probably not likely that the author of Hebrews uses this phrase, the treasures of Egypt, in a monetary, or at least a strictly monetary sense, that he gave up the wealth of his position. That's certainly true, but I think it's just kind of another synonym for all those benefits that he would have as a prince of Egypt, and all the things that royalty would allow him to possess. And so it says Moses carefully, he considered the benefits of suffering with his people, the reproach of Christ, and he compared to the temporary benefits of Egyptian royalty. And he made the decision, I'm going to associate with my people instead of the Egyptians. Okay, and so he considered that. We're talking about gain here. He had, the text says that he was looking to the reward, and that really is telling us that he considered that there was a spiritual gain here that would be granted to him if he removed this worldly gain of his princehood as an Egyptian. Okay, and the application is that in lots of times in Christian living, it's the correct thing to reject the riches of the world in place of some eternal rewards. Okay, perhaps taking that job that is much more money, but forces weekly travel away from your family. Okay, things like that, I think, is something that we should consider. Sometimes it is the best thing to reject the riches that some things in this life offer for those eternal rewards. Okay, so the author tells us that Moses did exactly that. He looked forward to that reward, which would come in the future, no doubt. He understood that. And yeah, we should do the same. We should do the same. And I remember once Pastor Larry made a comment, we just don't preach enough on the rewards of being a believer. So, yes. Yeah. I think, yeah. I think the author is making a comparison, that, yeah, that Moses was willing to endure the same humiliation and subjection that Christ endured in his suffering, for on the cross for our salvation. Yeah, yeah, yep, yeah. Okay, take a sip of coffee. Okay, moving on. By faith, verse 27, he left Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is unseen. Okay. Now, verse 27 does present a head scratcher for interpretation. Okay, the first question is, which departure from Egypt is the author talking about here? Moses left Egypt twice, right? First time, he left for Midian. 40 years later, he comes back, delivers the people. Second time he leaves is in the Exodus event, right? Which event is the author of Hebrews talking about? The first one or the second one? Okay. Well, if the author is recalling the first time, then we'd have trouble explaining that phrase, not fearing the wrath of the king, because if you go back in Exodus, that's exactly why Moses left the first time. Okay? Running from the king. He had killed an Egyptian, the word got out, and he fled, fearing the king's wrath. Okay? So it's probably not that one, but also, if the author of Hebrews is talking about the Exodus, then that would kind of be I'm going to use violation in quotes here. The author so far has strictly adhered to a chronological aspect of telling all of these examples. Okay, and what's the issue there? Okay, well, Passover is introduced in verse 28, coming up. But Passover occurred before the Exodus, so the chronology is goofed up. Okay, I think there is an explanation for it. I'm going to wait until we get to the Rahab situation later, because long story short, the walls of Jericho is mentioned first by the author of Hebrews, and then Rahab. But the Rahab event, hiding the spies, happened before the walls fell. So I think you're pushing it to say the author has to maintain a strict chronological sequence in the storytelling and these examples here. Okay? So I kind of lean towards probably talking about the Exodus here. Okay? All right. But what's the point? What is the point of all these examples? The point is that Moses left Egypt in faith, not in fear. He left in faith. Okay? Did he fully have a complete understanding of what God had planned for his life at this point? I don't think so. I don't think so. It seems that the critical point in time is about 40 years later at the burning bush episode. Okay. Did he have some knowledge? He probably did. But the full knowledge, I think, happened at the burning bush. Mark, you had a comment. Oh, yeah. Reverence versus panic. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Good point. That's perfectly. I agree, 100%. Um, it also um, helps kind of bolster either one is fine. The whole point is that he left in faith. That is the point. But yeah, you brought a good point up. All right. Let's see. See if I find my place here. He was steadfast. I mean, the New American Standard says he endured as seeing him who is unseen. Literally, the Greek is going to read, he was steadfast in seeing the invisible one. He was steadfast in seeing God. Okay. Um, I put having his eyes firmly fixed on the Lord, he was able to leave Egypt in faith, not fear. And that is where this example of faith the author is using here. Okay. All right, next verse. These are all, almost just single verse description of very long events in the Old Testament. Yes. I think at the birth of Moses, it was the prior king, was a previous king, somewhere along the line. The new king. You know, um, yeah, right, and yeah, yeah. Cecil B. DeMille says that. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, and the other part of this that's interesting is at the beginning of that film, the credits, Cecil B. DeMille also includes Josephus, the writings of Josephus. Now, what's in there that made it in the film that's not in a text of scripture? That'd be like a second tier level investigation. You'd have to read through Josephus, and I don't know how many pages that is. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Sure. Yeah. Well, and um, if Pharaoh the king has a sister, okay, and Pharaoh had a son, then those two would be related somehow. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Anyway. Yep. All right. By faith, um, he kept this is verse 28. He kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, so that he who destroyed the firstborn would not touch them. Okay. Um, Most English versions render the verb here. The verb is to do or to make the Passover. He kept the Passover. And then you have the Greek word kai, which is normally translated just and, a simple connective. But they most translate it, he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, almost suggesting these were two separate things. But we know that the sprinkling of the blood was kind of a subset of the Passover. It was something that they did during that Passover. So, and may not be the best way to translate it. There's enough semantic range in the word kai that you could render that something like that is. Make it, he kept the Passover, that is the sprinkling of blood. It's probably a better way to at least understand the connective kai here. Okay, where did the faith of Moses and the Israelites come in? Okay, if we go back to Exodus, Exodus 12:13 tells us, the Lord says, "The blood shall be a sign for you on the house where you live. When I see the blood, I will pass over you, and no plague will befall you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt." Okay, it's probably one of the best examples of faith that doesn't have any real difficult things to deal with, to decide what is real faith. What was the essence of what happened? The Lord God gave his word, said, "I promise you will not be hurt if I see the blood." And so did the Jews put their faith in the ritual of actually going out and putting blood on the doorposts? I don't think so. They believed that God would keep his word when he told them what to do. And it was their faith that prompted that simple obedience to go and do this ritual, right? And their faith was in the Lord, not in this ritual, okay? And we can learn a lot from that. That's where the faith came in. The people believed God when he said, "I will pass over you when I see the blood." Okay? Moving on. Incidentally, we've moved from Moses now here in verse 29. Now we're talking about the Israeli people as a whole, not just Moses. It says, "By faith they passed through the Red Sea as though they were passing through dry land. And the Egyptians, when they attempted it, they were drowned." Okay? Again, this is kind of an example of all of the Jewish people's faith at the time of the Red Sea crossing. Remember, they left Egypt. Egypt had been, defeated. They left, and they were camping out there by the Red Sea. And the text says that the Lord God hardened Pharaoh's heart. He gathered all his chariots and started to pursue the Israelis to destroy them again. And when he did that, the nation of Israel camping there at the sea, they really had two major things coming down on them simultaneously. That would have been a source of tremendous fear. Number one, you've got the Pharaoh's army coming at you, coming after you. They saw it. They understood, we're all going to die, that kind of stuff. But the other choice was what? We're going to walk in this sea between two huge walls of water and go to the other side. You think all of them said, "Yeah, let's do that. Let's go," without hesitation? I wouldn't have. I would have been a little fearful, looking at the water, understanding a little bit about physics, I'd have been a little bit scared. But they overcame that, and what did they do? They went. In faith, they went. Yes. Yes. Yeah. 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 Well, it actually, it's the funny part because the character Dathan in the Ten Commandments, he's the epitome of, satanic, idolatrous. Let's all go back to Egypt kind of stuff. But the walls go up, and he makes the comment, "How long do you think these walls of water are going to last? Let's go back to Egypt." I mean, just a silly kind of thing. And it's trying to goad the people into returning to Egypt because, at least in that story, and he's not in the text of Exodus at all. He's like one of the rulers of the Jewish people, that kind of stuff. So he had lots of incentive. But so by faith, they entered and walked across the dry land. The movie shows that this took, 5 or 10 minutes for them to all walk. The text says it took all night long. By morning, they were finally almost there. And the Egyptians, tried to retreat, and they were all drowned by the collapse of the water. And God's word that you won't see the Egyptians again after this day, that was fulfilled. Okay, so the imagery here is that the people they acted in faith. They walked through the Red Sea, and that God drowned the Egyptians. And sometimes stretching our faith happens when unnormal circumstances happen in our lives, and that is where we would be prudent to exercise faith in the Lord, that He is going to take care of us. Okay, I got 2 minutes to cover almost another page, but by faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been circled for 7 days. Okay, one of the most fascinating stories in the Old Testament. I love this one. How would an army normally siege a walled city? Wait them out and circle it, but if they wanted to do it sooner rather than later, what would they do? They could go over the top, ropes, or build a platform. They could dig underneath, right? Possibly, if they had the right, heavy machinery, they could, bulldoze a hole through it. Not that the Israelites had anything like that, but I'm sure they had that day equivalent to break a hole in the wall and get in that way. So this is just the most unusual military, campaign that you've ever seen. And here I've pasted the text of Joshua here, and literally walk around the city, blow the horns, shout, and the walls will just fall down. We won't have to do anything except that, and then we can go and decimate, Jericho, and that is exactly how Jericho fell. And again, as strange as this was militarily, the people obeyed God and did exactly what He told them to do. And they did that in faith. Okay? Could you imagine what some of the people were thinking? Especially the soldiers, they got their sword, they're ready to go. Lord told us we're going to take this place. He said, kill everything in there, leave nothing alive. They're ready to go. Wait, we're going to walk around 7 times and blow trumpets, and that's what we're going to do? Is that going to do? Okay. Put yourself in their place. But they did it. They believed God, and they said, okay, we're going to do this. We believe Him. And the Jericho fell exactly the way the Lord said it would. Okay, and then 11:31, last one for the day. We're running out of time here, almost out of time. By faith, Rahab the harlot did not perish along with those who were disobedient after she welcomed the spies. Okay, in peace. This actually happens before fall of Jericho, so I think that kind of puts to bed that the author of Hebrews is using a very strict chronology in these examples, okay, because Rahab hiding the spies occurs before the walls fell, and yet in this example it's after. So I think it kind of shows that the author's not totally strict in chronology. Okay, that's not the intent to provide a chronology of this. His intent is to provide the Old Testament examples of faith. Okay. All right. Rahab, she was a harlot in Jericho, prostitute. Joshua sent a couple of spies to check out Jericho, and Rahab welcomed them and actually hid them because it was found out that two spies came in to check things out. And I find it interesting. I kind of want to jump down to the bottom here quick. Rahab actually tells the spies that all the inhabitants of the land, everybody in Jericho, knew what God did to the Egyptians. They were aware of that, but only Rahab responded in faith to that knowledge. She was the one that hid the spies and made the deal for the preservation of her family for doing that. And God promised, through Joshua, that she and her family would be spared because of her faith in hiding that. So here's the text. It said, the people shouted, the priests blew the trumpets. When the people heard the sound of the trumpet, people shouted with a great shout, and the wall fell down flat as they burned the city with fire and all that was in it. However, Rahab, the harlot, and her father's household and all she had, Joshua spared. Love this part. And she has lived in the midst of Israel to this day. That's the Joshua text. So, Rahab was a prostitute. Okay? And her, example of faith should come at great comfort, come as great comfort from, those people that, kind of have come from a non-Christian background and had a much harder life than some of us, that were raised in Christians' home. It's a really good example of faith in very difficult circumstances. We could go on and on, but we're out of time. Steve. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It kind of shows you, if you step back and think about God's big sovereign plan, like at the 50,000-foot level. The events in the life of Joseph actually caused the nation of Israel to be there, and God glorified himself by delivering them from bondage in Egypt. Lots of imagery there, but, it shows you that his thoughts are not our thoughts. He sees the beginning from the end, and, he's even able to, like the text says, what people intend for evil, God can use for good, and turn that around for good for his own purposes. So, all right. Pastor Joshua is going to pick it up next week, and we are negative out of time.